Elena had worked at the music conservatory for almost 10 years. Every day she arrived before the sun rose, long before the students filled the halls with music and chatter. She walked quietly, pushing her old cleaning cart with care, as if she didn't want to disturb the walls that had heard so many beautiful sounds. Most of the students didn't even know her name. They just called her the cleaning lady, or didn't speak to her at all. To them, she was just a part of the background, like the chairs, the floors, or the dustbins she emptied. She didn't mind it. Not much anyway. Her steps were slow but steady. She swept the floors, wiped down the piano keys in the practice rooms, dusted music stands, and mopped the corners of stairwells. She worked quietly, humming sometimes under her breath. If anyone noticed, they didn't say a word. The students had their own lives to think about, their lessons, performances, competitions, dreams. They were the future stars of the music world. She was just someone who cleaned up after them. But Elena wasn't just cleaning up messes. She was listening. Every time she passed by a practice room and heard a violin, her feet slowed. If no one was looking, she would stop completely, standing just outside the door, her broom still in hand. She would close her eyes, tilt her head slightly, and listen. The music made her feel something that she couldn't explain. Joy, sadness, memory. She would feel her fingers move slightly as if they still remembered how to hold the bow, how to play the strings. But she never went inside. She just listened from the hallway, a shadow behind the glass door. Some students noticed her. Once in a while, they would see her standing outside the room, eyes closed, listening too deeply for just a cleaning lady. But they didn't ask questions. Why would they? Elena lived alone in a small apartment not far from the conservatory. It was quiet and simple, with old furniture and books stacked in corners. On one shelf, far in the back, was a black violin case. It was covered with a soft cloth and almost always left untouched. Sometimes, very late at night, she would pull it out and open it. She would look at the violin inside. The wood was worn but beautiful. She would run her fingers gently over the strings. Sometimes she would play a few notes, very softly, but then close the case again quickly, as if afraid someone would hear. Then she would sit on her old couch and stare at the wall for a long time. No one at the conservatory knew anything about her past. Not the teachers, not the staff, not the students. They knew her as someone who worked hard, who never complained, who stayed late and arrived early. But no one knew where she came from, or what kind of life she had lived before this one. And Elena never spoke about it. One day a group of students were sitting in the hallway near the main rehearsal room. They had just finished their classes for the day, and were laughing, eating snacks, and talking loudly about their music professors. Greg, one of the most confident and loud students in the group, had just come from his violin lesson. He was tall, always joking, and known for being a little arrogant. He liked showing off, especially in front of the younger students. As they laughed and teased each other, Elena came down the hall with her mop and bucket. She didn't look at them, but they noticed her. Greg elbowed his friend and smirked. "Hey," he said loudly, "there she is. The queen of the mop." His friends chuckled. Elena didn't react. She just kept mopping. Greg picked up a student violin from the bench near him, it wasn't his own, and held it up. "Hey, cleaning lady," he called. "Want to show us how it's done? Maybe you can play something for us?" The others burst into laughter. One girl said, "Yeah, give us a concert," in a mocking voice. It was meant as a joke, a silly, stupid joke. But something unexpected happened. Elena stopped. She didn't turn right away. She stood still for a second as if she hadn't heard properly. Then she turned slowly and looked at them. Her eyes were calm, not angry, not hurt, just calm in a strange, quiet way. She walked toward Greg and held out her hand. Greg blinked, confused. Then he handed her the violin without saying a word. She took the violin gently, almost lovingly. Her fingers moved over it as if she had held it 1,000 times before. She adjusted it under her chin and held the bow in her other hand. The hallway grew very quiet. Some students who had been walking by stopped when they saw her. One of them pulled out a phone to record, thinking this would be funny. Elena closed her eyes, and then she began to play. The first few notes were soft, but perfect, pure. Then the music grew, flowing out of the violin like water from a hidden spring. It filled the hallway, bouncing off the walls and wrapping around everyone who stood there. No one laughed. No one moved. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard. It wasn't just beautiful. It was full of life, pain, love, sorrow, joy, all mixed in every note. Elena's hands didn't shake. Her movements were smooth and full of grace, as if her body had been waiting for this moment for years. The students looked at each other, their mouths slightly open. More people began to gather. Teachers, other staff, students who had heard the music from other parts of the building. They stood silently watching this old cleaning lady bring a dusty hallway to life with just a violin. When she finished, she let the last note hang in the air for a long moment before lowering the instrument. Her eyes opened slowly. She handed the violin back to Greg, who now looked like he had seen a ghost. No one clapped, not because they didn't want to, but because they were too stunned to move. Finally, one girl whispered, Who is she?" Greg opened his mouth, but no words came out. Elena didn't wait for questions. She gave a small smile, turned, and picked up her mop again. Then she walked down the hallway and disappeared around the corner. The hallway stayed silent for a few more seconds. Then someone said softly, "Did you record that?" Another voice replied, "Yeah, I think I did." That night, the video of Elena playing the violin spread through the conservatory like wildfire. Students shared it in group chats. Professors watched it in disbelief. Nobody could believe what they had seen. The quiet cleaning lady who never spoke, playing like a master, as if the violin had been a part of her soul. People started asking questions. Who was she? Where did she learn to play like that? Was she really just a cleaning lady? The next morning, when Elena came into work, things felt different. People looked at her, but not in the usual way. They moved out of her path. Some nodded respectfully. A few even tried to speak to her, but she just smiled politely and kept working. But everything had already changed. The invisible cleaning lady had become something more. A mystery, a legend, a story waiting to be told. And this was only the beginning. After the moment in the hallway when Elena played the violin, nothing felt the same at the music conservatory. The halls still echoed with piano notes, cello warm-ups, and the buzz of students rushing to their next lessons. But something had shifted in the air. The silence after her performance had spoken louder than any applause. People kept whispering about what had happened, their faces full of confusion, wonder, and disbelief. The video of Elena playing had spread quickly. Within hours, almost every student had seen it. Some watched it again and again, zooming in on her calm face and graceful hands. Others searched online to see if they could find anything about her past, but there was nothing. No articles, no photos, no records. It was like she had appeared out of nowhere, played music like a master, and then melted back into the walls of the building. Elena, meanwhile, continued her work as usual. She arrived early, swept the floors, and avoided the crowds. But it wasn't so easy anymore. Now students greeted her with awkward smiles. Some tried to strike up conversations. A few even asked her for advice about music, but she just smiled gently and said, "You're doing fine. Keep practicing." She didn't say anything more. It was as if she had closed the door again after briefly opening it. But the students couldn't forget what they had seen. Greg, the one who had made the joke, felt especially strange. He had meant it to be funny, just a random tease. He never expected anything to come from it. But when she played that violin, something inside him shifted. He hadn't been able to sleep properly since. He kept thinking about the way her fingers danced across the strings and how easily she brought the hallway to silence. He felt ashamed, not because she made him look foolish, but because he had misjudged someone so deeply. One afternoon, a group of students gathered near the music lounge, still talking about her. "Did you see the way she held the bow?" one girl said. "That's not beginner stuff. That's someone who's trained for years." "Maybe she was a musician once," said another. "But something happened. Maybe a tragedy?" "She didn't just play well," said a boy quietly. "She played with feeling. I've never heard anything like it even in our concerts." "I heard she used to be famous," someone added. "Like in another country. But she lost everything. That's why she never talks about it." They didn't know the truth, but their guesses weren't so far off. The staff at the conservatory had also heard the rumors. One of the senior music professors, Mr. Collins, was especially curious. He had taught violin for over 30 years and thought he had seen everything. But when he saw the video of Elena, his jaw dropped. He recognized the style. It wasn't just technical excellence. It had soul, and that couldn't be taught easily. It came from experience, from pain, from life. He paused the video several times, studying her posture, her movements, her expression. Then he leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "This woman is not just a cleaner." He decided to speak to her. The next morning, Mr. Collins found Elena in the main hall, dusting the large windows. She turned as he approached and gave a small nod. "Good morning," he said kindly. "Elena, right?" She nodded again. "Yes, sir? I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say, I saw the video. You played beautifully." Her hands paused, but she didn't say anything. "I've been a violin teacher for many years," he continued, "and I can tell you were trained, formally, maybe even performed." Elena looked at him for a moment, then went back to dusting. "That was long ago," she said softly. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said gently. "But if you ever feel like sharing your story, I'd love to hear it." She gave him a small, polite smile, but said nothing more. He didn't push. He walked away, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. Later that week, a group of students were rehearsing in one of the larger practice rooms. Greg was among them. They were working on a quartet piece and struggling with the timing. Everyone was frustrated. The notes weren't flowing right, and the emotions were missing. The professor had already left, saying they needed to feel the music, not just play it. As they sat there trying to figure it out, Elena passed by the open door. She glanced inside, then paused for just a second. Greg saw her and stood up. "Elena," he called. She hesitated. Would you listen to us play? Just once?" The others looked confused, but curious. She didn't move for a moment. Then she slowly stepped into the room and leaned against the wall. Greg gave the signal, and they began to play. The notes were fine, but stiff. When they finished, Elena tilted her head slightly. "You're playing the notes correctly," she said gently. "But not the story." "The story?" asked one of the girls. "Yes," she said. "Music is not just sound. It's memory, feeling, imagination. This piece, it's about heartbreak. You're playing it like it's homework." They looked at her, wide-eyed. "Try again," she said. "But this time, imagine you just lost someone you loved." They tried again. And this time, something changed. The notes had more weight, more pain, more truth. When they finished, the room was quiet. Elena gave a small nod, then left the room. The students sat in silence for a while. They felt something in that moment. Something they hadn't learned in years of practice. She had said just a few words, but it had changed everything. Word spread quickly. Students started looking for Elena, not to mock her, but to learn from her. She avoided attention, but occasionally she would offer a comment or two. And every time she did, it made a difference. One evening, Greg stayed late in the conservatory. He had brought his violin and was trying to play a complicated piece for an upcoming recital. He kept making mistakes. He was tired, frustrated, and about to give up when he heard footsteps. Elena was walking past. She stopped when she saw him struggling. "Still here?" she asked. He laughed softly. "Trying to make this work, but I think the violin hates me." She smiled and walked closer. "May I?" He handed her the violin, and she played the section he was working on, slowly, clearly, beautifully. Then she handed it back. "You're holding too much tension in your shoulders," she said. "Relax them, and breathe with the music." He nodded and tried again. It was better. He looked at her and said, "Why don't you teach here? You're better than half our professors." She smiled but didn't answer. Greg hesitated, then asked, "Were you a professional? Before this?" Elena looked away for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, once." "Why did you stop?" She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "Because life doesn't always follow the song you want it to." He didn't understand fully, but he respected her answer. The next morning, Greg spoke to Mr. Collins and told him everything. Collins listened carefully, then said, "We need to know more." He went to the head of the conservatory and shared the story. Together they decided to invite Elena to a faculty meeting, not as a cleaner, but as a guest. When Elena received the invitation, she was surprised. At first, she wanted to say no. She didn't want to step into that world again, but something inside her said it was time. She walked into the meeting quietly, wearing her regular clothes. Nothing fancy. The room went silent. The professors stood when she entered. Out of respect, they asked her to share her story. At first, she hesitated, but then she took a deep breath and began to speak. She told them about her childhood in Eastern Europe, how she had started playing violin at the age of 6, how she had been called a prodigy, how she had traveled, performed, won awards. Then she told them about the war, the political unrest, the day her family fled, how her violin was almost lost, how she worked small jobs to survive, how finally she came to this country and started cleaning floors, because it was all she could do. "I stopped playing," she said, "because every time I held the violin, it reminded me of everything I had lost." There were tears in many eyes in that room. Mr. Collins stood and said, "Elena, would you consider teaching here? Even just a few classes?" Elena looked around. She saw the faces of people who now saw her not as a cleaner, but as someone who had lived, lost, and still carried music in her soul. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "If you believe I still have something to give, I would be honored." After that meeting with the faculty, everything started to change for Elena. Slowly, quietly, but surely. For the first time in many years, she was being seen, not as just a person who cleaned floors, but as someone who had something powerful to give, something that couldn't be bought or taught easily, something that came from a place much deeper than skill, her soul. But Elena didn't say yes to everything right away. She still woke up before the sun and followed her same quiet routine. She still cleaned the hallways, wiped windows, and mopped the floors. Even though she had been asked to teach, she hadn't yet decided what to do with that offer. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like something inside her wasn't fully ready to open again. She had kept her past buried for so long, and to bring it back meant opening up old wounds, memories, and feelings she had trained herself to hide. Every day now, students would greet her with more respect. They would smile, say hello, even ask her questions. Some would walk alongside her carrying their instruments, as if being near her might help them absorb some of her magic. Others watched her from afar, quietly wondering how someone so ordinary on the outside could carry something so extraordinary on the inside. One afternoon, Greg found her in the courtyard behind the conservatory, sitting on a bench. She was holding her old black violin case, the same one she had kept hidden for years in her apartment. He sat down next to her and didn't say anything at first. Then he asked gently, "Are you going to play again?" She didn't answer right. Away. She looked up at the sky, which was painted with soft orange clouds as the sun began to set. Then she said, "I don't know." Greg didn't push. He just sat with her. After a while, she opened the case. The violin inside still shone, with quiet beauty, its wood aged but rich. She lifted it carefully, like she was holding a piece of her own heart. She placed it under her chin and played a single note. It rang out across the empty courtyard like a whisper of something long forgotten. Then she played another, and another. She didn't play for long, just a few minutes. But when she stopped, her eyes were wet. Greg asked, "Do you miss it?" Elena nodded slowly. "Every day. So why don't you play more?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I'm scared that if I give myself to the music again, it will take everything." He didn't understand fully, but he respected her answer. He stood up and said, "When you're ready. We're all waiting." In the following weeks, the head of the conservatory arranged a special student gathering. It wasn't a formal concert, more like a discussion event where students could talk about their musical journeys, their fears, and their dreams. They asked Elena to come, not as a cleaner, not even as a teacher, but simply as a guest, someone whose story could inspire others. She hesitated again, but this time something inside her said yes. The event was held in the small concert hall. The lights were soft, the chairs arranged in a circle. Students and a few faculty members sat waiting, curious and respectful. Elena entered wearing her usual simple clothes. Nothing fancy, just herself. She walked to the center of the circle and looked around. "I don't know how to talk like teachers," she began, her voice calm but steady. "But I can tell you what happened to me." And she did. She told them about her childhood in a small Eastern European town, where her father was a violinist and her mother a teacher. She had started playing at age 6, copying her father's movements until she learned the bow's weight and the string's voice. She told them about her first concert at 10 years old, her first international tour at 15, and how music was everything to her, until everything changed. Then she spoke of war, not just the sound of bombs or the fear of soldiers, but the silence that came after, when everything familiar disappeared. Her family had fled their home with almost nothing. Her father had hidden her violin in a coat. They crossed borders, lived in refugee camps, and struggled to survive. In one camp, there was a small church. The priest there gave her permission to play her violin during evening prayers. She played softly at first, unsure. But the people who heard her said the music made them feel alive again. She realized then that music wasn't only performance, it was healing. She kept playing in secret places, but as the years passed, life became harder. Her parents died. She moved to a new country, and with no money, no documents, and no one to help, she took the first job she could get: cleaning. Her violin stayed with her, but she put it away. She told herself she didn't belong to that world anymore. "And so," she said quietly, "I became invisible. But the music never left me. It just waited." The room was silent. Every student sat frozen, listening. Then one girl asked, "Do you still believe music is your purpose?" Elena looked at her. "I think music is not just my purpose. It's my home." From that day, something changed in Elena's heart. A door that had stayed locked for years slowly opened. The conservatory gave her a chance to design her own class. Not a technical class, not even a formal one, but a special workshop about feeling music, understanding its story, and playing with emotion. They called it Music from the Soul. At First, only a few students signed up. But after one class, word spread quickly. Elena didn't teach scales or strict theory. She asked her students questions. What does this song mean to you? What memory does it bring? What would it sound like if you were heartbroken? Or if you were in love? Students who had struggled with confidence began to find their voice. Some cried during class. Others laughed. Everyone felt something. One day a boy named Alex brought in a piece he had written himself. He was shy and unsure, but Elena asked him to play it. After he finished, she said nothing for a long time. Then she walked over and hugged him. That, she said, was honest. And honesty is rare in music. Alex smiled with tears in his eyes. It was the first time anyone had believed in his music. Elena's classes became the most talked-about sessions at the conservatory. She didn't lecture, she listened. She didn't correct mistakes. She asked, "What do you feel when you play this?" And somehow, students began to improve, not just in skill, but in confidence, in feeling, in belief. Even the professors were impressed. Mr. Collins visited one of her sessions and stayed the entire time. Afterward, he said, "You don't teach from books. You teach from your soul. That's more powerful than any method." Still, Elena remained humble. She still cleaned the floors sometimes, not because she had to, but because it reminded her of where she came from. But people wouldn't let her hide anymore. The head of the conservatory came to her one day and said, "We're organizing a winter concert. We want you to perform." As our honored guest, Elena's heart pounded. She hadn't played on stage in over 20 years. The thought of facing a full audience, lights, and expectation, it terrified her, but also excited her. She said she'd think about it. For days, she walked around with the decision in her heart. She practiced alone in the courtyard, in empty rooms, and in her apartment at night. The violin felt both familiar and strange, like meeting an old friend after years apart. Then one night, she dreamed of her father. He was sitting in their old house, playing his violin. He looked up and said, "You were born for this, Elena. Don't run from it." She woke up with tears on her pillow. That morning, she told the conservatory, "Yes, I will perform." News spread fast. The concert sold out in 2 days. People from across the city wanted to see the mysterious woman, who had once been the cleaner and now was the star. On the night of the performance, the hall was full. Students, faculty, families, strangers, everyone waited with excitement. Backstage, Elena stood quietly with her violin in hand. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pinned back. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. Greg stood beside her. "You ready?" She smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be." The lights dimmed. The announcer spoke. "Please welcome our very special performer this evening, Madame Elena Markova." Gasps filled the room. For the first time, many learned her full name. Elena walked onto the stage. Slowly, calmly, she stood in the center, took a deep breath, and lifted her violin. Then she played, and once again, time stopped. The music she chose wasn't flashy or fast. It was soft, emotional, and full of longing. Every note seemed to tell a story. The story of a girl who loved music, lost everything, and found her way back. The story of silence, pain, hope, and courage. Some people cried. Others sat still, holding their breath. When she finished, there was silence. Then the applause exploded like thunder. People stood. They clapped. They cheered. Some shouted her name. Elena bowed with tears in her eyes. That night, the conservatory didn't just hear music. They witnessed a journey of strength, beauty, and the magic of never giving up. And Elena, once just a quiet cleaning lady with a hidden past, became something more. She became a symbol, a reminder that talent never dies, that pain can become power, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories come from the most unexpected people. After Elena's unforgettable performance at the winter concert, her life changed in ways she could never have imagined. The concert hall had been filled with people who witnessed not only her incredible skill, but also the emotion and soul behind every note she played. The applause that night was like a wave, rising and rising until it swept through the entire conservatory and beyond. The next morning, the news about Elena was everywhere. Local newspapers ran stories about the cleaning lady who played like a star, and social media was flooded with videos and pictures of her performance. The story captivated people's hearts. Here was a woman who had been invisible for so long, working quietly behind the scenes, and suddenly she was the star, a shining light in a world that often overlooks the quiet and the humble. For Elena, the attention was both exciting and frightening. She woke up each day wondering what new surprises the world had for her. She was no longer just a cleaner or a mysterious woman from the shadows. Now students stopped her in the hallways to ask for advice. Faculty members approached her with respect and admiration. Invitations to perform and teach poured in from different places. But despite all this, she stayed humble and careful. She didn't want to rush or lose the quiet strength that had carried her this far. One morning, as she swept the main corridor, a young woman named Maya approached her. Maya was a student of piano, shy but determined. She looked nervous and held a sheet of music tightly in her hands. "Ms. Elena," she began softly, I heard your story. I wanted to ask, would you help me with my music? I feel like I'm stuck, and I don't know how to express what I want to say." Elena smiled gently and nodded. "Of course," she said. "Music is about feelings, not just notes. Let me hear what you're playing." Maya played a short piece, but it was clear she was playing mechanically, without heart. Elena listened carefully and then asked, "What does this piece mean to you?" Maya hesitated. "I don't know. I think it's just a song I have to play." Elena sat down next to her. "Try to imagine a moment in your life that feels like this music. A moment that made you happy, sad, or hopeful." Maya closed her eyes. Slowly her fingers moved over the keys again. This time, her playing changed. It was softer, more honest, filled with emotion. Elena smiled. "That's it. Music is your story. Tell it." That moment became the start of something new. Elena wasn't just a performer now. She was a mentor, a guide, someone who helped others find their voice through music. Her workshops grew larger. More students came not just to learn the violin, but to learn how to feel music, to live it. They called her classes Elena's Heart, because that's what she taught, playing with heart. But with every new step, Elena faced new challenges. Some people in the conservatory were not happy. A few professors whispered that she was an outsider, that she didn't belong in their world. They thought her rise was too fast, too strange. One day, a senior teacher told Elena, "You are inspiring, but don't forget, teaching music requires years of study, not just feeling." Elena listened, but didn't argue. She knew her strength was different. It came from life, from pain, from survival. She decided not to fight, but to prove herself through her work. Meanwhile, Elena's personal life was still quiet. She lived, alone in a small apartment, filled with memories and her precious violin. She often thought about her family, her father's smile, her mother's warmth, the days before the war. Those memories were sometimes painful, but also gave her strength. One day, Elena received a letter from her home country. It was from a distant relative who had found her name in an old registry. They wanted to reconnect, to know if she was alive and well. The letter brought a flood of emotions. For years, Elena had believed her past was closed forever, locked behind a door she didn't want to open. But now, a small crack appeared. Could she go back? Could she face the past? She talked to Greg about it one evening. He listened quietly, as she spoke about the fear and hope inside her. "You've already come so far," he said. "Maybe it's time to face whatever's waiting. You don't have to do it alone." Elena nodded. She felt a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, she believed that healing was possible. She decided to take a short trip back to her homeland, something she had avoided for decades. The conservatory helped arrange everything. It was a chance not only to reconnect with family, but also to find peace. When Elena arrived, the air smelled different. The streets were both familiar and strange. Old buildings stood next to new ones. The town where she had grown up was smaller than she remembered, but the river still flowed, just the same. Her relatives welcomed her with tears and hugs. They told stories, shared photos, and asked about her life. Elena listened, smiling through her own tears. The trip was both beautiful and painful. She visited places from her childhood: the school where she first learned music, the park where she played with friends, and the old concert hall where she had once dreamed big dreams. At the concert hall, Elena was invited to play again. It was a small event, just family and a few locals, but to Elena, it was everything. She stood on the stage where she had performed as a young girl and played with the same passion, but now with deeper meaning. The audience was moved. Some wept, quietly, others clapped softly. Elena felt a weight lift from her heart. When she returned home to the conservatory, she felt different, stronger, lighter, more alive. She began to share her journey with her students. She told them about hope, about courage, about facing fears. Her story inspired many. Students who once doubted themselves found new confidence. Some who had thought music was just about perfection learned that it was about truth. Elena's influence grew beyond the conservatory. She was invited to speak at conferences, to write articles, and even to work with orchestras. She became a symbol, not just of talent, but of resilience and heart. One day, a famous conductor approached her with an invitation to join his orchestra as a guest soloist. It was an honor and a challenge. Elena hesitated but accepted. It was another step, another chance to show the world that she belonged. Her performances in big concert halls around the world brought tears and standing ovations. Critics praised her unique style, a blend of technique and deep emotion. People said her music told stories without words. But through it all, Elena stayed grounded. She never forgot where she came from. She still visited the conservatory, still taught her special classes, still cleaned sometimes, just because it reminded her of her journey. Her story became a lesson for everyone, that no matter how hard life gets, no matter how invisible you feel, you can rise. You can find your voice. You can shine. And sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the quietest places. After Elena's incredible journey of rediscovery and growth, the final chapter of her story was about how she transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. This part was about legacy, healing, and hope. When Elena returned from her homeland, she knew her story was far from over. She had faced many fears and found a new strength, but there was still so much to do. Music was no longer just a personal refuge. It had become her mission, her gift to the world. Back at the conservatory, Elena's influence was stronger than ever. Students who once whispered her name now eagerly sought her advice and guidance. The workshops she created, where students learned to connect with music emotionally, were now some of the most popular classes. The conservatory even named one of the rooms after her, a small bright studio called the Elena Markova Room, decorated with photos and mementos from her life. She kept working tirelessly. Her days were full, teaching, performing, mentoring, and sometimes cleaning. She loved those moments of quiet, the simple routine that kept her grounded. One day, a letter arrived from an international music foundation. They wanted to honor Elena with an award for her contribution to music and education. She was invited to a gala event in a big city, attended by famous musicians, conductors, and educators. The invitation filled her with nervous excitement. She had never imagined such recognition. For years, she had felt invisible, forgotten. Now, she was being celebrated. At the gala, Elena was introduced on stage. The applause was warm and long. As she stepped up to the microphone, she felt a rush of emotions: gratitude, disbelief, joy. She spoke simply, her voice steady but full of feeling. She thanked everyone who had believed in her and said, "Music saved me when I was lost. It gave me hope when there was none. And it taught me that no matter where you start, you can always find your voice." Her words touched the audience deeply. After the event, Elena's life changed again. Invitations to perform and teach came from around the world. She traveled to many countries, sharing her story and music, inspiring people from different cultures and backgrounds. Despite her busy schedule, Elena never forgot the young cleaning lady who had hidden her violin for so long. She made it a point to visit schools and organizations that helped underprivileged children. She believed everyone deserved a chance to discover their talents and dreams. In one town, she met a boy named Samuel. He was shy and withdrawn, living in a difficult neighborhood with few opportunities. But when he heard Elena play, something inside him sparked. She gave him her old violin, telling him to never stop believing in himself. Samuel practiced every day. Years later, he became a successful musician, always remembering Elena's kindness and faith. Elena's influence spread quietly but powerfully. She started a foundation to support young musicians from poor backgrounds, helping them get instruments, lessons, and support. She believed that talent could bloom anywhere, if given the chance. But her biggest challenge was still close to home: the conservatory that had first seen her potential. Some faculty members remained skeptical. They questioned if Elena's approach was traditional enough or if her story was too unusual for the world of classical music. One important concert was coming up, organized by the conservatory's director. It was a big event, a chance for students and teachers to showcase their talents. Elena was asked to lead a special workshop and to perform a solo piece. She accepted but knew this would be a test. She wanted to show that music was not just about rules and perfection, but about heart and story. For weeks, Elena worked with students from different backgrounds and skill levels. She helped them find their voice, encouraging them to play not only with their fingers, but with their feelings. On the night of the concert, the hall was packed. The audience was a mix of proud families, music lovers, and critics. Elena's workshop performance came last. The hall grew silent as she stepped onto the stage, violin in hand. She chose a piece close to her heart, a composition full of sadness and hope. As her bow moved across the strings, the music filled the room with emotion. It was not just sound, but a story. A journey through loss, courage, and the beauty of finding light in darkness. Many in the audience wiped tears. The energy in the hall was electric. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Standing, ovations, cheers, and whistles filled the air. For the first time, even the skeptical faculty members stood and clapped. They realized that Elena was not just a gifted musician, she was a bridge between tradition and new meaning. After the concert, the director approached Elena. "You have changed this conservatory," he said quietly. "Thank you for reminding us what music really is." Elena smiled, feeling a deep peace. But her story didn't end there. One afternoon, Greg came to see her with exciting news. The conservatory had decided to start a new program inspired by Elena's teachings. A program focused on emotional connection in music, open to all students regardless of background or skill. Elena was asked to lead the program. It was a dream come true. She threw herself into the work with passion. The program grew quickly. attracting students from all over the country. Many said it changed their lives. Elena's vision was clear. Music was a language of the soul, a way to heal, to express, and to connect. Years passed, and Elena became a beloved figure in the music world. She received awards, invitations, and honors, but she always stayed true to her humble roots. She still cleaned sometimes, still carried her old violin case, still told her story to anyone who would listen. One evening, during a quiet moment, Elena sat alone in her apartment. She looked at her violin and thought about the long road she had traveled, from a hidden past to a bright stage, from silence to song. She smiled, knowing her journey was a gift. She had taught the world that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places, and that no matter who you are or where you come from, you have a voice worth hearing. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt invisible, lost, or afraid. It was a story of hope.